Greetings and welcome to the Geospatial Information and Technology Association's webinar series. My name is Talbot Brooks and I'm the past president and am pleased to bring today's speaker, Dr. Jerry Johnson, into the mix. Dr. Johnson is the Geospatial Information Officer at the U.S. Department of Interior. In this role, he leads the Department of Interior's efforts to coordinate and implement geospatial technology across the department. He serves as a representative of the Managing Partner Organization for the National Geospatial Platform Initiative. Dr. Johnson holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from Michigan State, as well as a Master's and a PhD in Environmental Science from Indiana University. He serves as the Vice Chair of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, and is just an all-around great guy. And we're real excited to bring him to you today. For those of you who don't know, GITA kind of prides itself as being the premier educational organization for the geospatial industry. All this content is being recorded and will be provided via our Learning Center here. After the meeting, we usually have it up in a matter of minutes. And if you're not a member of GITA, please, we encourage you to join. There is a membership category for just about everybody, and there's room for all, and volunteers are always welcomed. During the course of today's meeting, I ask that everybody please keep their phones on mute. And if you have questions or comments, they're very much encouraged. Please use the chat function within WebEx to pose your questions, and I'll keep track of them and ask them of Dr. Johnson at the end of today's webinar. We're expected to run about 45-50 minutes, and thus, with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Johnson.
Thank you so much, Talbot, and welcome everybody. Thank you, Talbot, for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it, and for the invitation to speak with the GITA membership today. I know that some people are at kind of varying levels of familiarity with some of the work that we're doing in the Federal Geographic Data Committee, and specifically with regards to some things that we're trying to do with shared infrastructure that we're pretty excited about. I think we're at a really interesting, kind of turning point in the work that we're doing, and I'm happy for the opportunity to share it with the group here today. So as Talbot mentioned, please do, as you have questions, use the little raise hand icon in the webinar, and we'll keep track of those, and then hopefully I'll leave plenty of time for discussion and addressing any questions that the group may have towards the end of the presentation. So I want to talk about four major topics today. First and foremost, just give people some background on the history and the current capabilities of what we're trying to do, so to explain the Geospatial Platform Initiative, kind of how we got here and where we're at right now. And then the part that I'm truly excited about is what's coming soon. So we've got some stuff that has been in development really for the last couple of months, and that we're starting to roll out late this summer and into the fall. That I'll give you all a sneak preview of and show you some things that we have that I think are really going to sort of up the bar in terms of what we've been trying to do from a shared infrastructure perspective. But all of this is in the context of this nebulous thing called the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to hit on different parts of why this initiative, why we decided to take this on in the first place, and what it means, with regards to some of the bigger goals that we're trying to implement in terms of building a national spatial data infrastructure and making spatial data more available and more used, throughout all sectors of the economy in the country. And then, as I mentioned, I'll try and leave some time at the end for questions and any discussion that the group would like to have. So starting with the history and current capabilities, one thing that I've reflected on, as Talbot mentioned, I'm for the last 3 years, I've been in the position of the Geospatial Information Officer at the Department of the Interior. Prior to that, I served as the GIO for the Environmental Protection Agency for a few years. And one of the things that I've noticed as the political leadership has changed and different appointees have come in and out of leadership positions in the federal agencies is that the story that I have to tell when new people come on board has changed over time to some extent. And it used to be that when I would have a new political boss or a colleague, come on board, I would start by explaining what it is that we do in our community. So I work on geographic information systems, and they're about making maps that you can add data and do queries and interaction. It really struck me when Secretary Jewell came on board at the Department of the Interior, I guess about 2 years ago now. And I started off with that pitch the first time I had an opportunity to speak to her. I think it was on her first or second week on the job. And it was very funny in that she was very kind, but she clearly understood everything that I was talking about and really wanted to cut to the chase. Look, I get GIS. I understand geospatial technology. Tell me how it is that we're going to use this to improve what we do at the Department of the Interior. And how are you going to help me, achieve the goals that I have using this technology? So I think, over time, in many of the agencies across government, and hopefully in other organizations, I hope that's a consistent experience that you all have in your, respective communities and in your respective workplaces. I think the value and the ubiquity of geospatial data and tools are widely recognized, certainly across government business, but I think that cuts across, many sectors. But in the government space, we still have a number of challenges. First and foremost, inconsistent success in finding what it is you need, getting access to the right data at the right time, and a related note, an inability to surface critical national data sets in search results. When I mentioned my past experience at the Environmental Protection Agency, one of their biggest programs in terms of data to the public is called the Toxics Release Inventory. And when I first started working at the EPA, I used the National Geospatial Catalog of Record at the time, Geospatial One Stop. I said, well, let me see what I find when I look for Toxics Release Inventory. The first hit in that catalog was a 10-year-old clip of the data that the state of Arkansas, CAST, for those who work with that group, who has done amazing things. CAST had lots of metadata published, and as it turned out, they were really good at this, and they got their copy, their little clip of out-of-date, data that was our authoritative data set, surfaced first in the catalog. There are many issues like that, and I'll talk about those as we go through the program, but really finding what it is that people are looking for, and hopefully, as we move forward, suggesting to people what it is they might be interested in looking for is a big part of what we're trying to do with this shared infrastructure. The last two bullets are really about innovation. Certainly there's been an explosion in the consumer marketplace with regards to the use of geospatial tools and Google Maps and all these other things that are out there that have made mapping much more ordinary in the day-to-day life of citizens across the country. A lot of this goes on, and as those of you who work in government agencies can attest to, I think in most cases, sometimes government is a little slow to pick up some of these adoptions. In many instances, there are good reasons for that pertain to IT security and procurement rules and all kinds of other things. But we think there's an opportunity by working together, by forging good relationships and partnerships with our industry partners, with innovators in the geospatial technical community, that there's an opportunity to use a program like this to try and take advantage of innovative technologies as quickly as we can, and certainly to make sure we're building an ecosystem in government where when something innovative happens in one organization, it can hopefully be leveraged by many others. So those are really some of the ideas that were bouncing around at the time of the evolution of some of the early ideas of what we're doing in the geospatial platform. That all came together in the fiscal year 2011, so roughly 4 years ago, when we got direction, very vague direction, from the Office of Management and Budget at the White House to create something called a geospatial platform. And this had been really a part of this discussion about how we can do a better job of taking advantage of geospatial technology, how we can better share, some of the things that I pointed out on the last screen. And I think OMB gave us a huge opportunity in that regard. They told the FGDC and our, the partner agencies to go, figure out what that means and try and build some shared technologies, some shared capabilities that can advance your common mission goals. At almost precisely the same time, we got a very real-world example of why the federal government needs to, and state and local governments and emergency responders across the country need to be able to collaborate better using shared geospatial infrastructures. And that was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So, like I said, within weeks of us getting the direction to put together a budget proposal and some ideas for what we might do from a shared infrastructure standpoint, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened. So we took advantage of that opportunity. We took advantage of the need to get information out to the public. And I want to stress that what we were doing at this time was not in support of the operational emergency response or emergency management components of government that were addressing the response. But instead, we were really looking at how do we as government get information out to the media and out to the public about what we're doing with regards to this bill, where things are happening, where cleanup is taking place, how the oil spill is moving, what the weather is, all these other, these data that were being collected by a multitude of different federal and state agencies in particular. And at first, we were releasing all that content on different websites. So FEMA had their map, and EPA had their map, and different parts of the Department of the Interior had their maps, and the state had their map, and so on. So we used this idea and built the first version of geoplatform.gov very quickly. And it's really with great thanks to NOAA, who took the lead on that development. And stood up an application that showed all of the agency data that was spatial, that was being collected with regards to the spill, that was shareable with the public. And it was a huge success. The geoplatform.gov in that iteration was featured on CNN, got hundreds of thousands, I think millions of hits after it was featured on CNN, and then it immediately crashed. So we learned a lot about infrastructure and sort of the demand for some of the things that we were trying to do. So that was a good experience for us and really helped us get together some of the ideas that shaped what it was that we did for the rest of the platform's evolution. And along the way, and I'll show a timeline on the next slide, a number of initiatives, not so much about getting maps to the public, but about getting data to the public and data to innovators and to companies that can take government information and do creative things and build business with them, came along as well. And those were really the data.gov initiative and then later the executive orders that have come out with regards to the publication of open data. The work we've been doing is hugely influenced by those drivers as well. So from a timeline perspective, I'll start back just a few years ago and go quickly through some of the highlights. One thing that I do want to stress, the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, so we've been very lucky to have a fantastic group of people that have really served the country and the member agencies of the Federal Geographic Data Committee since 2008. And right now we have Talbot Brooks on the committee. We're very lucky to have Talbot. He's been on, I think, for 3 years now, and we're hoping to keep him around a little bit longer. So a great group of people that's been giving us advice that helps shape what we do in this initiative and helps shape what we do in many technology initiatives across the government. So that's been instrumental in kind of helping us move forward. I mentioned data.gov. So when data.gov was launched, this was a very early open data initiative from the administration. And I think on the day we launched that site, it had 35 or 40 data sets in it. We knew that the geospatial community had a 10-year head start in creating metadata for all the national geospatial data that was available through Geospatial One Stop and other catalogs. So over time, we began to merge the capabilities of data.gov and some of the work that the geospatial community had been doing. I already mentioned the budget guidance. Once we got that call to action from the budget, and this is really the point of this slide and the timeline, the members of the Federal Geographic Data Committee took to a very important planning process in terms of thinking about what this meant, how it is that we could evolve and take advantage of the partnerships that we had in the FGDC, and really, use this as an opportunity to improve what we do with geospatial technology nationally. So the FGDC agencies have been working very hard for the last several years on this. You'll see that some people might be familiar with this. There was supplemental guidance released for OMB Circular A16. That's really the foundational document that created the Federal Geographic Data Committee and coordination among the national government members of the geospatial community. That's greatly shaped, and I'll talk about that when we get to the technical part of the platform, but that's greatly shaped our work. The initial launch of the platform in 2011, the first real version of geoplatform.gov. Over time, we've developed the roadmap and a value proposition, business plans, and then we got audited. And in many government agencies, certainly in the federal agencies, audits are a good thing. They're frequent. They come in and help us evaluate what it is that we're doing in some of our programs and give us some direction and guidance as to what it is we should be doing as we go forward. This work from GAO has helped us shape some of the functional requirements of what we're doing in the shared infrastructure, and has really helped the agencies publish their data in better and more effective ways. I mentioned the OpenGov directives, but the most recent pieces of this work might be the most important and the most foundational in kind of helping the FGDC and the national geospatial community shape our shared path forward. One document that we're really proud of is near the end of 2013, we released a strategic plan for the national spatial data infrastructure. What is it that we think we need to do to make data more available, to make geospatial technology more available to all of our partners. And I'll talk about how the platform specifically supports that, and right after this slide I'm going to talk about the big goals of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure Plan. The second version of the platform was released. A related document and something else you'll hear me talk about today are this concept of national geospatial data assets. So of all the geospatial data that government agencies collect and maintain, what do we think are the most important, and how are we going to manage and publish our information about those data sets? So I'll show some things we're doing in the platform to help elevate that work as well, which takes us up to today. So the NSDI strategic plan is a very short document. If people are interested and you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to take a look at the Federal Geographic Data Committee website at fgdc.gov, and we've got some of these things available for review. The plan is organized around 3 high-level goals. And again, this is really, our way as the FGDC members of trying to define a path forward for what it is we're going to do to make spatial data, for the most part, more available and more useful, for all different components of the nation. The plan has, like I said, 3 high-level goals, and those are organized around 9 objectives. And perhaps most importantly, there are a number of very specific actions that are called out. I think one area where we've struggled in the federal community with regards to geospatial coordination in the past is creating a lot of great visions, some ideas and other things, but not necessarily assigning responsibility for making some of those things happen. I hope one of the things that we're doing differently this time, and that we're really trying to take some of those lessons to heart, is by being very concrete in defining what actions it is we need to take over the lifespan of this plan, and it's a 3-year plan as defined currently. And then assigning responsibility to an agency, and in many cases to specific people in those agencies who are responsible for carrying out different action items to help us achieve these objectives that are nested under the goals. So the 3 goals, just stepping through them really quickly. First, develop capabilities for national shared services. One of the issues, I think, with the concept of a national spatial data infrastructure that we've started to really come to terms with in the FGDC discussions is that it's been in the past predicated on a notion that if you set technology standards and interoperability standards, that every actor in the community who has data that might be worth sharing will be able to easily and readily publish that data and make it available as services that will create this national network of services that everybody can access for a wide range of purposes. I think what we found in reality over time is that that's partially true. In many cases, our partner agencies, in not just federal agencies, but in state and local and regional and tribal governments, are very good at doing that. And they publish a lot of their geospatial data as open web services. It's consumed readily. Those services are managed and monitored. But I think in many cases, we publish services that aren't of great quality. They move without people being notified. The performance isn't great, and sometimes we don't have the resources to build the infrastructure that's needed to improve that performance. And I think sometimes it's often the case, and I can speak specifically for the different pieces of the Department of the Interior that I've worked most closely with. Sometimes we just, as IT people, don't make it very easy for the geospatial people in our mission areas to make their data available. We set rules and tell them how to do something, but we don't essentially give them the technical capabilities to make this happen. So I think with cloud computing, a lot of other things, there are huge opportunities from a technology perspective to take that barrier away and to make it very easy for our partners to publish their data. So that's a big part of what we're trying to achieve through the objectives of this goal, and I'll just touch on a couple of them. So establishing the geospatial platform as the data, services, and applications web-based services environment. A big part of what we're trying to do, and I'll talk about this in more detail in the what's coming soon part of the platform really, is a shared hosting environment that our partners will be able to publish data, make it available as highly performant, monitored web services that others can benefit from. So to try and take some of the difficulty, the complexities away of publishing data. That's achieved largely through the use of cloud computing. In the federal agencies in particular, getting to commercial cloud environments has been a challenge for many due to security issues and procurement issues and a lot of other barriers that we have in front of us in terms to using commercial technologies in some cases. And then just to make sure that we're sharing, promote the use of multi-agency acquisition vehicles. How is it that when we make sure when my agency buys something, that's not a repetitive purchase from something that's going on in a partner agency, either at the state or the national level? The second goal is about accountability, and it really gets at that last thing I was talking about, making sure that there's no duplicative purchases, making sure that we understand what it is that agencies are buying and how we're taking advantage of those as those data sets, those geospatial data sets as strategic assets. A big part of this work is captured in, I mentioned earlier, the supplemental guidance to OMB Circular A16, which is about managing the national geospatial portfolio. How is it that we look at all of the work that we do in the government agencies in particular, and to look at the trade-offs in this as like you would an investment portfolio. So if we're making an investment in this data set this year, what does that mean we're not going to be able to do as agencies, understanding that resources are constrained? Likewise, I think having more awareness of a portfolio of those data assets really helps us understand where the gaps are and where other people are doing things that maybe we don't all have to. There are a lot of overlapping missions across agencies, certainly in multiple levels of government. And just understanding the complete portfolio of the data sets that are out there hopefully helps us with the second objective on the screen, and that's identifying opportunities for collaborating on investments and looking at potentially duplicative investments. I think a great example of that is and I'm a homer, I understand that, but the USGS work on the 3D elevation program and the National LiDAR acquisition has been really great work in that regard, where they are trying to bring the country together really in terms of how we purchase that type of data and how we acquire that data. Lastly, the third goal, and this surprised us a little bit in some of the discussions. I should have mentioned that the creation of this plan, the National Geospatial Advisory Committee that I mentioned was instrumental in bringing this forward. Talbot helped us a ton as well. Really looking at, asking the community, well, what is it you want the federal agencies to do? What role do we best take? Understanding that since the idea of an NSDI was first floated, the role of government has changed very much in the geospatial marketplace. We're no longer the huge producers of data that we used to be in terms of the percentage of geospatial data and where it originates. The commercial sector really is now. Universities do a lot. State and local governments do a huge amount of this publication, and the federal government has a role as aggregator in many instances, and sometimes as a data originator. But one of the things that we heard consistently from our partners as we went out and did a number of listening sessions and a number of joint work sessions with partner agencies and partner organizations was that everybody stressed that the role that the federal government can play in bringing people together, in convening organizations, and how is it that we can convene these discussions. I think one of the great things about the National Geospatial Advisory Committee isn't so much necessarily always the advice that the group gives the FGDC member agencies. It's the fact that we brought a lot of people together who are really smart and doing really interesting things from different parts of the national geospatial community to have a series of conversations. It's a group of people that wouldn't have gotten together 4 times a year for a few days each time, but for something like this. So I think the role of the federal agencies as convener is something that we're really trying to look at more carefully and to think about how we can even how we can expand that even further going forward. So that kind of gets me, and I'm going to focus then back on the NSDI Goal 1, so the National Shared Services issue. And really, the geospatial platform is the central implementation of what we're trying to do for the national spatial data infrastructure going forward. And it's organized around sort of 4 main concepts. And this isn't perfect, but it just gives some buckets to talk about the different pieces of the work that we're doing right now in. And I'll go through each of these briefly. The first is web presentation and collaboration among our users. The second is search. How do you find what it is you're looking for? How do we improve people's ability to find what it is they're looking for? The third, shared IT and data investments. That's a lot about this common hosting infrastructure that I mentioned, along with some tools that I'll show. And then the national geodata assets. How do we really highlight this portfolio management approach? So when you go to the website today, it looks like many other government portal websites. I'm excited about what we're doing going forward, and I'm going to show a preview of that in a second. But our homepage today features topical maps, some data, and some stories, and then perhaps most interestingly, a lot of the website is dedicated to presenting content in what we call communities. These communities are spaces where we can bring together different practitioners in the geospatial community, different users of geospatial information, and give them more or less their own corner of our website, where they have threaded discussions, they can highlight which data and tools are of interest to them, they can post forum messages, share documents, and other kind of things like that. One of the things that we've been doing very actively in those communities is promoting the collaboration that needs to happen among data developer participants in the A16 content themes. So we have a number of different communities, if you go there today, that support the collaboration that needs to happen among all the partners that are working on those different themes. So the Elevation community is a great example where you can see their tools, their meeting invitations, their standards, and other things. So that they're part of our geospatial infrastructure that they control. So that group manages that content. They're able to go in and make changes to the website, and they're not reliant on our team separately, from a central standpoint to do that work on their behalf. We also have a number and a growing number of what we call interagency communities, so kind of communities of practice that come together around not necessarily an A16 theme, but an area that they work together. And you'll see one in the site. I'll show a screenshot of it for the DHS geospatial concept of operations document, which is really a national emergency response, emergency management community that uses the geospatial platform as a way to expose the data and tools that are of most interest to their communities. We have a number of different things that are coming online over the course of the next several months as well. This is just a quick screenshot of what the site looks like if you go there today. I mentioned the featured applications and the maps, which you can see on the bottom. Near the upper right is a running count of the number of things that are in our catalog. I think last week or the week before we eclipsed 100,000, so there's a lot of different things registered in our catalog, data, tools, maps, and so on. The middle box on the bottom is interesting. It's trending data, so what is getting surfaced the most in our search results. Unsurprisingly, although it took us you see the Great Chile earthquake of 1960 showing up, that really bugged us. Why on earth is the Great Chile earthquake the second most popular hit result in our catalog consistently? It wasn't like it was a blip. It's almost always been on that list. Well, as it turns out, that page in our catalog is very well indexed in Google, and a lot of kids do projects or homework assignments on the Great Chile earthquake, and they're coming to the GeoPlatform catalog or to data.gov and looking at that metadata record because it's first or second in the Google search terms. So that was something we learned too, and we've been working very hard not only on building kind of our own search capabilities inside the platform, but on making sure that when users register their content here, it is well indexed in the commercial search engines and the places that people really start their searches for data first in many instances. This is an example of one of the communities that I mentioned. This is that geospatial concept of operations. So you can see a few different things highlighted here, sort of some general information about what this community is all about. Authoritative data, so the GeoConops list of data sets that are used in different parts of the Homeland Security mission space. Best practices, I mentioned discussion forum, there are some tools that are registered on here and so on. Again, this is, DHS is the sponsor for this community. They work with their partners to manage and maintain and update the content that's stored in here. And that's something we want to continue as time goes on with the platform. The second major piece of what we do, the search and the catalog. So this has been a huge part of the work, probably for the first 2 years of the geospatial platform, has been getting the catalog infrastructure in place to support us. We had, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, a very long head start on the data.gov initiative when it was released, in that the geospatial community had been working on a national data catalog for quite some time. So over time, we have established a very close partnership with the data.gov team. Today, when you go to geoplatform.gov, what you see is essentially a filtered view of the records, the authoritative metadata records that are in the data.gov catalog. The big thing that we had to do was not about technology, it was policy. We had to work with the White House offices to make sure that we could get permission for non-federal or non-executive branch records specifically to appear in an OMB or a White House-sponsored website, data.gov. So that was a huge policy issue that we had to get through to include state, local, university, NGO, and in some cases even private sector records in our catalog. But thanks to a lot of great staff at the Office of Management and Budget and at the General Services Administration who manage data.gov, we got through a lot of those hurdles. So today, if you register a geospatial data set or a geospatial web service or a map in data.gov, it automatically comes up in the platform. So we have one national catalog of record, and the platform, we're going to take those records, and over time, we're going to be extending what people can do with them, and you'll get some different functionality from those same core metadata records than you can see today on data.gov. Shared investments, the IT and data investments, I've touched on this already, so I won't go into a ton of detail, but I'll just say that, there is, with the rapid advancements in commercial cloud computing, the changes in the geospatial marketplace in particular, a huge opportunity at relatively low cost to build shared hosting infrastructure. So I mentioned the challenge of getting some of our agency partners to publish high-quality web services or to publish web services at all in some cases, to expose their data to our partners. We've got two different infrastructures that support us in that regard. One is, like you, I'm sure, we use ArcGIS Online. It's a fantastic set of capabilities that supports a lot of what we do in the geospatial platform today, including some data hosting and services publication. And then second, we're currently working on building out fully. We've had a limited infrastructure today, but now we're in rapid development for getting to our kind of production infrastructure with a lot of capability for provisioning a virtually unlimited number of ArcGIS servers or the OpenGeo equivalent. So we're using the Amazon Web Services environment as our hosting provider and building a secure hosting capability that will have two flavors, essentially. One is we're provisioning some of that infrastructure as a common good. So when agencies have data that they need to make available and the FGDC members have decided that that's a priority, we're going to take the shared investment that funds the geospatial platform and publish some of those data as web services. The second type of infrastructure is more or less a pay-as-you-go. I mentioned how complicated and difficult it can be for some of our partners in many levels of government. I've talked to several states about this as well. To procure, cloud-based hosting infrastructure for what it is they want to do. Because of procurement challenges or security challenges in particular, we hope that there's an opportunity to, create a service desk essentially that can, at cost, provision that infrastructure for our partners when they have very specific needs for it. We'll be making more announcements about that as the federal fiscal year comes to a close. We expect that roughly in October, some of these capabilities will be coming online. Lastly, the National Geospatial Data Assets. I touched on this just a little bit, but let me summarize it by saying, so there are 100,000 things in the catalog. Finding what you want is non-trivial in many cases, and finding what the FGDC members have decided is the most important is even less trivial from just looking at a bunch of metadata records. The FGDC has gone through a process and with their partners and has identified roughly 170, I can't remember the exact number, data layers that they deem as nationally significant. So it doesn't mean authoritative, because the word authoritative is very laden with how you're using it and for what mission purpose and other things. But nationally important or nationally significant data sets that came up in discussions as being, if you were to pick a very small subset of things in the broad concept of the NSDI as being the most important, what would they be? for those data sets, we've established that management plan that I referenced on the timeline, and the geospatial platform infrastructure provides a couple of things. The hosting and collaboration support, so we will, for any of the national geodata assets, make that data available as web services from our infrastructure if the agency chooses to do that. We provide in our theme communities the ability for data set managers and cross agencies to be working together on the work that they're doing to make some of these data sets available. And just simple registration. So for the first time, and this is new a couple of weeks ago, you can now go to the geospatial platform and find every NGDA. So they're all registered in our catalog. When this exercise started, some of these data sets were not actually discoverable in catalogs. So this has been a really big effort by the FGDC member communities, and we're happy to be able to support part of it on the platform. But what I'm really excited about, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of what's coming next and really what we've been working on over the last several months. So since roughly February, we have been in the process of redesigning and redeploying the entirety of the infrastructure for the geoplatform.gov website and all of the underlying capabilities. And a part of the opportunity that we have from a technical perspective is we're no longer constrained by the somewhat aging and borrowed hosting infrastructure that we were using at the Geological Survey when this project started. We've moved into the Amazon Web Services environment, so we have virtually unlimited capabilities for some of the software development and hosting of those assets that we need for the platform. And we have what we think will be greatly increased capabilities and performance on the site. So I'm going to show a couple screenshots of what we're calling a preview release. We're currently in the process of going through the security documentation and hardening of the environment to make sure we're meeting federal standards for IT security. Working at the Department of the Interior, we were involved in the breach that was widely reported in the media from the Office of Personnel Management servers. So we're taking, not that we never took security seriously, but right now in particular, we're taking security extremely seriously and are working through the verification of that here late in the summer and into the early fall. So we're showing off some of the work that we're doing, though, in advance of the formal release, just to get feedback from our partners in the community. And some of the things that I'll show today, although there's more than this that's in development, a new homepage and the overall web design, a WebNet viewer and with some integrated service quality measures, new capabilities for creating maps, for sharing them, for creating galleries, and then finally some performance and portfolio measurement tools that we're pretty excited about as well. So coming soon, this will replace what you see at geoplatform.gov when you come in today. We hope, one of the things that I will readily acknowledge is when you go to our website right now, it's not very clear what the geospatial platform is. We didn't do a great job of explaining it for a first-time user and kind of helping them understand the different things that are available to them in the site. So we're trying to put more of that right up front. So you see a card that appears. This is a screenshot from a user from a time when I was not logged into the system. It says, gee, you're not logged in. Is it your first time here? Here are some things you can do. You can create an account. You can share your work. You can register some of your data and so on. So as you log in, the screen will morph. The cards will change, and it'll show you some of the things you've done at the site the last time. Over time, what we hope to be doing is saying, when Talbot logs in, he could be a member of a utilities community, and we would show, a lot of content that we think is relevant to him or to anybody in the site who's expressed a number of preferences about what it is that they are interested in when they come. So we're redesigning the website, around this concept that's become very popular on the web in terms of presenting all the information in cards and making sure that those cards are context sensitive, so they change based on who you are, what you did the last time you were at the site, and eventually what we think you might be interested in. So we're looking at semantic web technologies and starting to do some of the design and development work to be able to make those kinds of suggestions. So you're a member of this community, a natural resources community or a water community. The last time you were here, you looked at these 4 maps. This map is related to that one, and it's new. We think you might be interested in this and present it. Or say this map has data sets in it that other users who have liked that map also liked. Very familiar to those who use Amazon.com or other places like that, where this kind of presentation of information has become commonplace. We're starting to build some of that technology behind the Geospatial Platform website as well, and that won't come online in the next release, but probably into the winter and then into next spring. So this is the second capability I wanted to show, and this is our new map viewer. And I can, even though you're all muted, I can almost hear the groan. So there's another map viewer. We have millions of map viewers across all of our respective organizations. And I completely get that. This map viewer solves a couple of very specific problems from the current version of geoplatform.gov today, and I'm very happy with where we're at right now with our capabilities. First and foremost, of the 100,000 or so data sets that are registered in the geoplatform.gov catalog when you go there today, it's very unclear from a user perspective what you can do with some of those data sets. You don't know readily know which ones I can drop on a map, which ones are web services that I can browse or play around with or get to understand. You see in the middle pane on this screenshot, there are roughly 11,500, at least at the time that I took that screenshot, either OGC or Esri web services that are registered among those 100,000 data assets in the catalog. So now I can go through and use this, and there's some filtering tools on the left that you can see in search capabilities. But now I can go through and highlight some of those and start to, you see in the preview map that's drawing on the right side, start to draw those on a map. Really importantly though, from a search quality standpoint, from a user experience standpoint, one of the things that we've seen repeatedly in some of these national catalog efforts, and in some cases in some commercial analogs, is that when you click on some of those map services, nothing happens. Sometimes the service is down. Sometimes the service has changed and nobody changed the metadata records and things like that. This little stoplight indicator that appears to the right of each of the data set names is really important and something we're going to be expanding on greatly in future releases of the platform. And that's an indicator of service quality. And if you were able to scroll down in this screenshot, you'd actually see that there's a filter facet on the bottom left side of the screen that allows a user to say, I only want to look at the services that are good, that are available, that I know are going to draw when I bring them up versus some that we've had trouble with. This capability for monitoring the service quality of what's registered in our catalog is really critical to a lot of the work that we're going to be doing. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface in terms of really measuring what the NSDI is and how we're doing at making some of these data sets available. So this is the early iteration of that capability, just looking at how many times, and programmatically, how many times over the last several weeks when I tried to ask that web server for a map did it respond in a reasonable amount of time. We want to take that information, and over time we'll be developing reports and sending them back to the data publishers. So we've been monitoring the services that you provide. I'll pick one of our agencies. We'll tell the Bureau of Land Management, you publish 100 web services are available in the catalog. Here's what we see when we look at them. And in hopes that this is really a way by giving them some concrete feedback to help people raise the bar. And then we can offer the shared infrastructure of the geospatial platform to help even further for those who really do need a hand from if they have aging infrastructure, if they don't have the people that are needed to manage some of that data. This is where some of the scalability and some of the capabilities of building infrastructure in commercial cloud environments that I really think we can take advantage of. So it is a map viewer. However, I think some of the things that we're doing in terms of being able to visualize the data assets that are in the catalog and the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, and then the beginnings of showing people the service quality of what they're seeing, I think are potentially really important and perhaps what's different about this from what we've done in the past. As you draw that map and start to add layers to it, users can go in and save that map. They can type in a little bit of metadata and share that map, get a permalink to that map. And many of you who use ArcGIS Online use ArcGIS Online for that. And so do we. So one of the things we're doing on the geospatial platform in the new release is allowing our users to come in and use our web map tool to create a map. Authorized users who have access to our shared or to their organizational ArcGIS Online subscription can use ArcGIS Online, and they're just maps. So you can see that these things all appear in a standard gallery. I've got the map on the upper left of the screen that was created in our map viewer, as was the one below it. And then you see some other ones that have a green tag in it that say AGOL Web Map. So that's a map that lives in the ArcGIS Online environment. So our users can go in and share any of those maps, embed them onto pages in geoplatform.gov, get a permalink to embed them elsewhere, email them to other users, et cetera. So we're trying to extend some of the capabilities that users have to them, available to them in the ArcGIS Online environment to users who don't have accounts in that organization or don't have organizational subscriptions, and really in a way that's completely open and shareable across different organizational boundaries as well. People can take these maps, and it's not shown in any screenshots, but I can create a gallery of things that are related and embed that in a site or share that gallery with other users as well. Lastly is the work that we're doing with dashboards. I mentioned the work on the National Geodata assets a couple of times. One of the things that we're trying to do with those national geodata assets, aside from trying to make sure that there are great web services that make all that data available, is really to measure how we're doing from a data management lifecycle standpoint for making those data sets available and for managing those data sets as government organizations. This dashboard is a prototype, but we actually expect to be releasing this in the early fall. That presents survey results. So I mentioned the 170 data layers of the National Geodata assets. Each one of those data sets has a person in a federal agency who's been named as the national coordinator for that data set. They're going through and answering a long series of questions, a survey instrument, about how they're doing with the different aspects of the data management lifecycle for that data set. And the data that's on here are completely mocked up. But you can see we organize metrics by different stages of the data set lifecycle: define, inventory and evaluate, obtain, access, maintain, et cetera. If this were live, when you mouse over and click on different parts of the site, you get more information about what that metric is, what the questions were on the survey, specifically how the agency answered those questions, and so on. One thing that a lot of users have commented on is you see a bunch of shades of green. So these things range from 0 out of 5 to 5 out of 5. We don't want this to become a dashboard that people are punished for. The idea here is that we're trying to do a fair assessment of where we stand in terms of managing these data as strategic assets, as a part of a data management lifecycle, and to publish information for our users to help everybody improve, and move up that data lifecycle as time goes on. So the shades of green has become a bit of a joke, but nobody wanted a scorecard that was red, on here to kind of say these are bad versus good, because it's really not meant to be a value judgment. It's just a picture of where we're at over time. We will be advancing the data that are in here, advancing the capabilities, extending more and more dashboards, really measuring and quantifying what we're trying to do as far as making these data sets and these themes of data available nationally is a big part of the work we're doing on the platform today. So I'll just close by talking about going back to the beginning and talking about how this advances what we're doing in the National Spatial Data infrastructure. Those lifecycle components are a great way of thinking about that, and many of those are things that we're centrally trying to improve with regards to the infrastructure that we're building and the capabilities we're deploying on the geospatial platform. The inventory stage, we have that metadata catalog, over 100,000 assets now in partnership with our friends at the data.gov program. Obtain, one thing I didn't talk a lot about because the capability that's there today is admittedly a bit nascent, is the marketplace of the geospatial platform. And the idea here is that we want to build a place that allows, first and foremost, government partners, but ultimately perhaps private sector sellers of data and other people who are profit motivated to come together and build partnerships about data acquisition and data development. We've got work to do, but there's a lot of interesting ideas that have been proposed and some things that are in design for what we might do with the marketplace as time goes on. Access, I've talked a lot about that. So all the data that's available in the geospatial platform are available over open standards. We think that we can make more data available, high quality data and web services available through the deployment of shared infrastructure. Maintain, I showed the quality of service indicators in the viewer that we're starting to provide to users, and eventually I mentioned those reports that we'll be giving back to the data set maintainers in the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. Then last, but certainly not least, it's use. How is it that we actually make this sticky, and get people to play around with data and share maps as open social objects from the geospatial platform? A big part of that as we go forward, there's not a lot there today, but you're going to see more and more and more of this. Everything that I showed in terms of the new capabilities that we're releasing on the website is made available through a series of open application programming interfaces. We'll be documenting all of that, making all that developer documentation available so that other people can build their own applications that either reuse entirely or just take advantage of bits and pieces of what we're doing or the services that we make available on the geospatial platform. That's a big part of what we want to do too, is build a sharing ecosystem where people are publishing code back to us. We will publish all our code in an open source code repository, GitHub, I expect, and hopefully build a community of people who are sharing the work that they're doing and leveraging the work that people are doing in partner organizations. So I talked a little longer than I'd like to. I apologize for that, Talbot, but I hope I'll have a few minutes at the end here for discussion or any questions that the group may have.
No, you're right on track, Jerry. Thank you very much for an outstanding presentation. I think one of the things that really hit me looking at this is, when I first started interacting with federal data sets, it was really sometimes frustrating to find them, and I felt very disconnected as a person and as a user. But now, this is kind of creating a more personal component to this. The idea that we can offer some input and actually interact on a reasonably intimate level with the federal government with data sets and about data sets like this as users is really shrinking the world here. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
I'd ask that participants who have questions, please go ahead and fire them off in the chat window, and we can pose them to Jerry. I also want to remind folks that this webinar is being recorded and will be available at gita.org in the Learning Center. It's open content for everybody. And if you're not a member, please do consider membership, because your membership helps make content like this available. And I think professional education and the opportunity to learn about things like this is a terribly important part of every geospatial professional's working life. So Jerry, one of the things I wanted to put to you is, GITA is a lot about infrastructure and geospatial applications therein. And for example, we have a pipeline conference, oil and gas pipeline conference, coming up in Houston this September. And in prior discussions, the pipeline community has been struggling for a way to kind of partner with DHS and FEMA and Interior on best practices for sharing their data and how to, just kind of build a community. Is the platform an apt venue for something like that? How can constituencies engage and start creating that sort of thing if it is appropriate?
It definitely is, Talbot. Now, I will, openly acknowledge that we've been slow out of the gate in terms of getting some of the new communities stood up and available. And one of the reasons for that is the redesign of the website that I showed off, part of today. So we have been in transition and kind of, moving to a new infrastructure and to a new framework, really, for the website. But, as this work gets released, we want to go back and make sure that we're catching up on some of the communities that have been asked for, and to start to provision some of those things for, our partners in the National Geospatial community. One of the things I didn't mention, so I'm really glad you asked the question, is that the key here is that each one of those communities does have a federal sponsor. So there needs to be a federal agency that says, we're driving this. Now, that has nothing to do with money or intent or desire of what we're trying to do in the geospatial platform. It is a somewhat bureaucratic reason. It's because that we need, as the central platform team, to make sure that we have somebody that we can rely on to adhere to federal requirements for publishing content on a federal government website. That's it. So I think the key, Talbot, in answering your question is to find the right sponsor organization. I think in your case it probably is, DHS, and I know there have been discussions in that regard, to raise their hand and say, yeah, we want to take this on, and we're going to ask the platform team formally to stand up that community. So I think the pipeline example, or more generally, looking at infrastructure or utilities, would be a great idea because, to be honest, for me, we see a lot of great examples in the natural resources space and maybe not as much in some other sectors, and I'd really like to extend, some of the work that we're doing to some equally important sectors that have maybe been underrepresented in national geospatial, activities.
Well, that's great. That's something I will absolutely take on as a challenge to GITA. David has a question. Are there security access levels for different data sets, or is there equal and open access for all to everything? Can you talk a little bit about how permissions and access are managed?
Sure, that's a great question. So one thing that I didn't touch on, it was briefly mentioned on a slide, but we've been working very hard through an organization called the Program Manager for the Information Sharing Environment, which is a small, White House-housed office that's responsible for looking at how information moves from classified to sensitive but unclassified to fully open environments. The geospatial platform is a part of that infrastructure. So in the federal agencies, the National Intelligence Community, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency specifically, has responsibility for information sharing at classified levels of maps and geospatial content. DHS really has that for Homeland Security sensitive but unclassified, controlled unclassified information for people who are familiar with that, and to some extent law enforcement information in their environment that we do have separate controls for. The geospatial platform is intended largely to be the open sharing environment. So if you look back, there's a document called the Geospatial Interoperability Reference Architecture that outlines these target environments for that data sharing or that information sharing. So the platform's real sweet spot is the data that are shareable to anybody. That said, we do have the concept of a public and a private asset on the site. For example, there are several data sets and several communities of people that manage those data sets that are only available to a certain subset of users. So we have an identity and access management system that's resident to geoplatform.gov that we can keep track of who can see what. It's not a highly secure environment. We don't go through and, for example, require that federal employees are using their identity cards, their smart cards to authenticate to our system. That's really what DHS and the intelligence community are doing in the bigger picture, but we do have some capabilities for protecting information from those who don't have rights to see it on our site. But they're pretty simple and not necessarily heavily technically built out.
Jerry, do you have a slide or something that you can pop up there with your contact information so folks can follow up if they have a different additional questions? And then I think I'll close it down with maybe the first is a short answer, and then the second kind of is a longer question you might be able to wrap with. Some of the data sets and stuff that folks are interested in seem to have kind of an international flavor to them. Yeah. For example, pipelines, they don't just end here in the U.S. Is there some coordination going on with those other organizations, and is there the ability to bring down these data sets as ShapeFile, or whatever, or is it, what can they do kind of, can you put an envelope around that data access, download, and geographic scope? And then the last, if you wouldn't mind ending with it, is, we got an election coming up next year. What kind of safeguards are in place to keep this whole thing moving forward? So,
great question.
grab whatever you can there and take us home.
All right, thanks, Talbot. So with regards to the first one, the geographic scope, we get that question very often. So the focus of what we're trying to do in the geospatial platform is, admittedly U.S. centric. So it's the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, our central implementation. We work very closely, and Talbot's participated in some of this, through the United Nations. There is a lot of work that goes on in terms of looking at geospatial activities like our national spatial data infrastructure work across, country boundaries. Specifically in the pipeline example, we work very closely with Canada, who's building their own geospatial platform that's modeled after some of the work we've done in the U.S., and certainly Mexico, who's doing a lot. INEGI, the statistical and mapping lead organization in Mexico, is doing a ton with regards to geospatial data interoperability. So while our focus is national, we have a lot of collaborative activities that we work with our international partners. And from a technical, requirements standpoint of geoplatform.gov, we do have some international data that's there today. So there's actually an activity that was sponsored by the State Department and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. If you go to the geoplatform.gov site today, you'll see several records with regards to international aid appearing in our catalog and available. So there's no real, reason why we can't include international data in some of what we do, and in fact, we do it for some partners. It just, since our focus has really been on these national geodata assets and getting those available, that's, much of the work has been, U.S. Restricted. With regards to the election and how do you make this permanent, I think one of the things that we've been able to achieve, and this activity, as I showed on the timeline, has been going on for several years. One of the great things about what we've done in this work, and maybe this was the hardest part, so technology in this space is easy, in many aspects, because there's just such great technology in the commercial and the open source and the university environments today in particular that we can just take advantage of and reuse. From a funding standpoint, one of the things that we've tried to do is to make sure that this is something that is contributed to by all. And I didn't talk about this at the beginning, but the way that the Geospatial Platform Initiative is funded is there's a bill that goes out to all the members of the FGDC at the beginning of the year, the tithing to the Geospatial Platform Program, essentially, and they make contributions. From a bureaucratic standpoint, that's a pain because we have to collect money from 30 or 40 partners. Sometimes we get it quickly, sometimes we don't, et cetera. So we take on a lot of administrative burden. But from a political longevity standpoint and from a stability standpoint, it's actually a really good thing because it doesn't put a large budget item in anybody's individual budget. It doesn't create a target, for something that looks like a juicy thing to cut or to save money. So we spread small amounts of money across, multiple agency budgets, and they make that contribution. The second thing that I'll point out is that, while there were some political, drivers behind, much of the work that we've done, a lot of this work was really championed by the career staff in the Office of Management and Budget. So the budget analysts who were there before, this administration came on board, they'll be there after, this administration leaves. I think we've shown some success. We've got work to do. We've got a lot of milestones that we're, holding ourselves accountable for and a lot of things that we want to deliver over the next several months. But I do think we've started to deliver on the proposition that we made about, really making it easier for people to get access to data. Talbot, as you mentioned, to kind of socializing and, making compelling and engaging some of this geospatial content. We have a lot of career staff that will help influence those decisions as time goes on that I think will be of great help. That said, one of the reasons for success of this program has been work that organizations like the National Geospatial Advisory Committee and other, GITA and, ERISA and, many other organizations that come together because you guys can do things that the federal agencies can't, and that's go talk to elected officials about the importance of what it is that we do, about the need for funding for some of the things that we do in the national geospatial data community in particular. And I feel like we have done a good job over the last 6 or 8 years of getting some national messages around those issues put together. It's not something I can do as a federal employee, but it's certainly something that I think helps, nationally in terms of making sure that no matter who the next administration is that comes on board, I think it's critical that we, the national geospatial community as a whole, private and public sector, have a series of shared talking points or an elevator pitch that we can go to the new team with to talk about how important what we do is.
Dr. Johnson, thank you very much. An outstanding presentation. We truly appreciate your donation of time and effort in putting this together for our membership. And again, this content has been recorded and will be available via the GITA website in our Learning Center, open and accessible by anybody and everybody. And I encourage folks, if they do have questions or comments, you can follow up with Dr. Johnson. His contact information is on screen. Or shoot me an email at via the GITA website, and we'll do what we can to see that your concerns or questions are addressed. Look for an announcement about next month's webinar. It will be Dr. Daryl Murdoch and Max Weber from USGIF talking about some issues in credentialing and how we can work together collaboratively with the workforce to address credentialing and education needs in the geospatial workforce. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next month.